Hello there, I am Sleepy Tunes, and I am here to help you. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so please, like the video and subscribe. Also, what time are you watching and where are you from? Now get comfortable and enjoy the tales. The house at the end of Brightfern Street did not have a gate. It had a tall, winding fence of dark green wood, with planks that twisted like vines and leaned just slightly inward, as if whispering secrets to each other. It wrapped all the way, around a lot like a ribbon someone had forgotten to untie. But there was no gate, no latch dot, no break, just a fence, a perfect unbroken loop, and still, people said they'd seen someone go in, not grown-ups. Grown-ups didn't talk about the house at all. They walked past it like it wasn't there. They whistled when they reached it, or checked their phones, or suddenly remembered they had to be somewhere else. But kids noticed, and of all the kids on Brightfern Street, no one noticed more than June Wren. June was 11 years old and collected impossible things. She had a glass jar of perfectly round pebbles she'd found under the swing set during a thunderstorm. She kept a bundle of string she'd untangled from the tail of a fox it had gotten stuck on a fence post. The fox had waited patiently while she freed it. She once found a feather that shimmered different colors every morning and swore it changed with her dreams. She was curious and quiet, and the kind of girl who always had dirt under her fingernails from poking around in forgotten corners of the world. She lived 2 blocks down from the house with the green fence, and every afternoon she passed it on her bike, and every time she slowed down, just a little, just enough to wonder what's inside that fence, the house behind the fence. It wasn't particularly spooky. It was small, with rounded windows and a sloped red roof. Its chimney leaned to one side like it was tired. There were flower boxes under the windows, though the flowers in them never wilted, not even in the snow. The whole place looked slightly smudged, like a memory that had been handled to many times. But the strangest thing wasn't the fence, it was the hum. The house hummed, not loud, not like a machine or a song. It was more like a vibration, a feeling in the air. Like the moment right before someone whispers your name. June noticed it the first time she walked by alone. She was 8, and the street was quiet except for the wind, and suddenly she felt it, that low, steady hum in her ribs. Not unpleasant, just ... there since then. It had never stopped. Every time she passed, the hum returned. Every time she looked at the fence, her fingertips tingled, and every time she thought, someone is in there, someone who's waiting. On the first day of autumn, June decided to find out. She told no one, not because it was a secret, not yet, but because no one would believe her anyway. Adults would say it was a neighbor with a noisy air conditioner. Kids would make jokes or dare each other to throw rocks at the fence. Even her older brother Toby would just roll his eyes and call her weird dot. So she packed a notebook, 2 granola bars, and her best pencil, the one with a mushroom eraser, and set out on her bike. The sun was setting early now. The air smelled like dry leaves and chimney smoke. Crows hopped along the sidewalk like little guards. When she reached the house, she stopped. She put her feet on the ground, and she waited. Nothing happened for 10 minutes, then 20. Then a car passed, and June almost gave up. But just as she turned to go, she heard it, a click, soft, delicate, like the sound of a book closing. She turned around. There was now a door in the fence, not a gate, a door, painted the same dark green as the fence, nearly invisible unless you were standing right in front of it. It had a brass doorknob shaped like a curled leaf. and a tiny round window like a porthole. June stared. The hum grew louder. Not in her ears, in her chest. She reached out. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from excitement. The way her hands shook before she opened a present or a new book. She touched the doorknob. It was warm, and when she turned it, it clicked again. The door opened. Inside the fence was a garden, but not like any garden she'd seen before. It glowed, not brightly, but gently, like fireflies or far-off stars. Mushrooms with silver spots lined the edges of the path. Vines dangled from trees like ribbons. Flowers pulsed slowly in the fading light, like they were breathing. And the air, it smelled like cinnamon and rain. The hum was stronger here. It came from the house, but also from the trees, the ground, the air itself. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, like being wrapped in a song you didn't know you knew. June stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft chuff, like a sigh. She turned to look, but the door was gone. Just fence, no knob, no seam. She was inside. The path led her toward the house. As she walked, she noticed little things. A rocking chair on the porch, rocking gently on its own. A bird bath filled with what looked like melted candle wax. A chime hanging from a crooked tree branch, though no wind moved it. At the foot of the steps was a stone shaped exactly like a sleeping cat. When she reached the porch, the front door opened. It didn't creak, it didn't slam, it simply opened, wide and quiet. Inside was warm, golden light, and the humming became something new. It became music. The first room was round. A fire burned in a fireplace, carved with symbols, leaves, moons, suns, spirals. Bookshelves lined the walls, each shelf slightly tilted like it was listening. There were cushions on the floor, soft as clouds. Jars of dried herbs and marbles and buttons sat in neat rows. And in the center of it all stood a woman, not old, not young. Her hair was the color of storm clouds. Her dress was moss green and shimmered like beetle wings. Her eyes were bright and kind. She smiled. "I've been waiting for you, June." The woman didn't move when June stepped into the round room. She just smiled, wide, warm, not too big, not too small. The kind of smile you get from someone who already knows you. Like strawberry jam, but not grape. "I'm called Myra," the woman said, her voice the exact sound of butter melting on toast. "And this is the house that hums." June opened her mouth to say something, anything, but instead, she just nodded. There wasn't fear, only awe and a fizzing curiosity that bubbled behind her ribs like soda. Myra turned toward a low wooden table and gestured with a hand. "Come, you must be thirsty. The house said you like honey in your tea." June blinked. "The house talks. Not in words," said Myra, "but it hums. And when you've lived in it long enough, you learn how to listen." She poured 2 cups from a steaming teapot, shaped like an owl with spectacles. The tea was pale pink and smelled faintly of cardamom and mint and something June couldn't name, like the feeling of finishing a good book. June took the cup. It warmed her hands instantly. She sipped and blinked again, because the tea tasted like something from her. Memory, but twisted in a way that didn't make sense. It tasted like the first time she ever saw snow, like the plastic beads on her grandmother's sweater, like the time she fell asleep in the back seat of the car and woke up to the sound of soft music. She lowered the cup. "What is this?" Myra sipped her own, then set it down gently. "It's called remembering tea." June looked down at the steam curling from her cup. "It remembers Things I forgot. Mira tilted her head. Not quite. It remembers what you didn't know you were keeping. For a while, they sat in silence. June didn't know how to explain the strange calm she felt. Like her insides had matched the weather exactly. The warmth of the fire, the weight of the chair, the humming. It was always there now, deep in her bones, like background music only she could hear. Eventually, she asked, "Why me?" Mira gave her a curious look. "Why not you, I mean," June said, hugging her knees. "Why did the door open for me? Why now?" Mira leaned back. "The house opens when it wants to be known," she said. "It's not about needing anything. It's about timing. You're here because the house is ready, and because you noticed it." June thought of all the times she'd slowed her bike near the fence, the times she'd felt the hum and leaned into it. She hadn't known she was doing anything special, but maybe she'd been answering a call she hadn't heard with her ears. Myra stood and walked to a tall shelf shaped like a tree. She ran her fingers along the books, each spine stitched in fabric instead of paper. "There are others," she said. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Others, like me." Mira nodded. "Visitors, listeners, people who come when the house needs to remember itself." June stood, curiosity tugging at her like a string. "Can I see more of it? The house?" Mira smiled, and this time it crinkled the corners of her eyes. "I thought you'd never ask." The house had more rooms than should have fit inside it. Behind the round sitting room was a hallway lined with wooden doors, each one different. One was painted in stars. One was shaped like a teardrop. One had a brass handle that giggled when touched. Mira gestured to the hallway. "Each room remembers something. Go on, the house is awake now." June hesitated, then stepped into the hallway. The hum was louder here, not in volume, but in feeling. Each door vibrated gently as she passed, like it was waiting to be touched. She stopped at the one with peeling, blue paint and a knob shaped like a marble. She opened it. Inside was a bedroom, small, cozy. The walls were covered in hand-drawn maps and sketches. A worn blanket was folded neatly at the foot of the bed. There was a jar of shells on the nightstand, and a book open to a page with notes scribbled in the margins. The room smelled like pencils and rain. June stepped inside. This room belonged to someone. She said softly, "Yes," Mira said behind her. "A boy named Ellis. He used to come on Thursdays. He liked drawing maps of places no one had been." June touched the edge of the desk. "Where is he now?" Mira shrugged. "Gone home, I suppose. The house doesn't keep people, just memories." June looked around again, slowly. She wasn't sure if she felt sad or comforted. She turned back toward the hall. They passed 3 more doors. One opened into a greenhouse filled with floating candles and vines that whispered. One led to a room made entirely of pillows. Another was locked, but hummed the loudest of all. "What's behind that one?" June asked. Myra's voice dropped to a near whisper. "That's the listening room. It only opens when someone needs to hear something." June didn't ask more. The door made her feel like her heart was being very, very quiet. They returned to the sitting room. The fire had dimmed, but the warmth remained. Miso the cat. June had no idea how she knew the cat's name, but she did. Curled on the windowsill like she'd been there forever. Myra sat again. "You can come back tomorrow, if you like." June hesitated. "The door will still be there." Mira's eyes twinkled. "If you keep noticing." June sipped the last of her tea. It tasted like candlelight and dusty libraries and her mother humming while folding laundry. She smiled. I'll be back. The door was there again the next afternoon. June hadn't been sure it would be. She had tried not to expect it, because she had learned, somewhere deep in her bones, that expectation often scared away magic. But still, as she turned the corner, on Brightfern Street, her chest held that quiet hope, the kind that feels like a small light cupped in both hands. And there it was, the fence, just as it had been, the humming, just as strong, and the door, green and silent, waiting for her. She stepped through. This time, the garden had changed. The flowers were different, purple and orange, and curling like flames. The mushrooms had rearranged themselves into a spiral. The vines hanging from the trees were dotted with paper cranes, folded and fluttering softly. June walked the path with steady steps. The house door opened before she reached it. Myra was standing in the hall, holding 2 cups of tea. "Welcome back," she said, as if June had only stepped out for a moment. June smiled. "The house feels different today." Myra handed her a cup. "It always does. It hums what it hears." They walked together through the hallway of doors. June glanced at the listening room, still closed, still loud in the way that made her quiet inside. She didn't stop. Today, something pulled her farther. At the end of the hall was a door she hadn't seen yesterday. It was made of dark wood and had no handle at all, just a narrow slit in the center, like a mouth about to speak. When she leaned close, she heard it singing, faint and unfinished, like someone humming a song they didn't know all the words. Too. She looked at Mira. "That room remembers a song," Mira said. "Can I hear it?" Mira nodded once. "If you're willing to listen the whole way through." The room inside was unlike any of the others. It was tall, much taller than it should have been. The ceiling curved high above, painted with gold constellations that moved when she wasn't looking directly at them. The walls were lined with shelves, but not of books. Instruments, a violin that seemed to breathe, a harp with strings made of silver thread, a drum shaped like a heart, a piano with keys that blinked like eyes when she passed. In the center of the room was a low stool and a music stand with nothing on it, and the humming, it was clearer now, still soft, still winding, but layered, like the room was remembering something together. June walked forward and sat on the stool. The room quieted then. Slowly, the humming rose again. It was not a melody she recognized, and yet it felt known. It rose and fell like breath. It paused, like it was waiting for her. June closed her eyes, and, before she could stop herself, she began to hum along. Not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly, and the room responded. The harp let out a single, long note. The piano joined with a gentle chord. The walls vibrated with warmth. June kept humming. She didn't know the tune. She didn't need to. She only needed to follow. When she opened her eyes, Myra was sitting in the corner, smiling softly. That was the part the house had forgotten. Myra said. June tilted her head. "What part?" "You," Myra said. "Or someone like you." It needed a voice to remember the rest of the song. June blinked. The instruments had gone quiet now, but the hum still lingered. It had changed. It felt rounder, more whole, like a story, with a proper middle. They left the music room and returned to the round room with the fire. June sat on one of the cushions and held her tea. It smelled like bread, baking, and rain on pavement. She said, "Does the house change when I come in?" "Yes." Myra said. And no, it changes for you, but also with you. That feels like a riddle. It is, but it's also true. June took another sip. She thought of the music room, of the way it had waited. Do you ever leave? She asked. Myra smiled. I did, once. A long time ago. Where did you go? Out, into the world. The house called me back when it was ready for someone new. June's eyes widened. You were a visitor. Myra nodded, like you later. June wandered the garden again. This time, the trees had grown tiny bells. They tinkled softly in the breeze. A new path had formed, not dirt, but pressed petals. It led to a small pond she didn't remember from before. The water was perfectly still, and in it she saw her reflection. Only it wasn't exactly her, it was June, but older, wearing a coat with many pockets, holding a notebook full of folded pages, eyes quiet and kind. She stared for a long time, not afraid, just curious, and in the reflection, her older self smiled. When she returned to the door in the fence, it opened with the same soft sigh. The outside world was exactly as she left it. Same cracked sidewalk, same sleepy street, same orange leaves drifting in the wind. But June felt different, not bigger, not smarter, just a little more full. Like the humming had made room in her chest for something important. She whispered to the fence, I'll be back. And behind her, the house hummed in reply. On her third visit, June brought a gift. She wasn't sure why, only that she woke that morning with a certain feeling that the house deserved something back. Something real, something that hummed in its own way. So she brought a button, not just any button. It was small and pearly white, with 4 holes and a chip on one side. It had come off her father's old coat last winter, and she'd found it in the pocket after he'd left for the train station. She'd kept it without knowing why. That morning, she'd polished it with her sleeve and slipped it into her coat pocket when she reached the house. The door in the green fence was already open. It knew she was coming. Myra was in the garden, sitting on a bench made of twisted vines and book pages. A teacup floated gently beside her, trailing wisps of steam. You brought something, she said, before June even spoke. June nodded and opened her hand. Myra leaned forward and took the button gently, like it might sing if handled wrong. Very good, she said. Now we find where it goes. They entered the house and turned left instead of right. June had never been that way. The hall was narrower here, the ceiling lower. The humming was quiet, almost hesitant, as though it didn't want to interrupt whatever they were about to find. They stopped in front of a small wooden cabinet. It had one drawer. The drawer was slightly open, and light spilled from the crack, not bright, but soft and golden, like sunlight under water. Myra touched the edge of the drawer. This is the growing drawer. What does it grow? June asked. Memories, said Myra, but only if they're ready. She motioned for June to place the button inside. June did. It landed on a little velvet pillow, perfectly sized, like the drawer had known its shape. Before she arrived, nothing happened for a moment. Then, slowly, something sprouted. It was a vine, small, green, curling like a question mark. It grew around the button and bloomed into a single white flower. The center of the flower looked like the stitches on a coat, June gasped. That's... She didn't finish the sentence. Myra smiled. The drawer keeps the memory, but gives you something back, she said. Take the flower. June reached out and plucked it gently. It was warm in her hand as she held it. An image bloomed in her mind. Her father's coat hanging on the hook. His laugh, low and sudden. A snowball fight. Her mitten tangled in his scarf. The flower pulsed. "Will it last?" she whispered. "As long as you need it to," Myra said. They walked back to the round room. June tucked the flower behind her. The humming in the walls felt closer now, like it had moved into her skin. Myra sat on the cushions and motioned for June to join her. "The house is changing again," she said, "because you're changing." June thought about that. "I don't feel very different." "That's the quiet kind of change," said Myra. "It doesn't show until you look back." They drank tea in companionable silence. June's cup tasted like notebooks and new socks and flashlight, shadows on the ceiling. Later, June asked, "Have you always lived here?" Myra didn't answer right away. She picked up a book from the shelf, one with no title, and ran her hand along its spine. "No," she said, softly. "I arrived the same way you did." June sat up straighter. "So, you were a visitor. And then, what happened?" "The house asked me to stay," Myra said. "And I said yes." June considered that. She wasn't sure she understood, but she wasn't sure she needed to. Not yet. She looked round the room. "I want to see something new." Myra's eyes twinkled. "Then you're ready for the stairwell." The stairwell was behind a curtain of hanging feathers. It spiraled downward, not upward, which surprised June. She'd assumed new things always lived above, not below. The walls of the stairwell were covered in chalk drawings. Trees, cats, boats, eyes, doors. Some were scrawled messily. Others were detailed, layered, strange dot. Myra walked ahead, her fingers grazing the wall as she passed. "The chalk is left by visitors," she said. "The ones who needed to leave something behind, like a memory, like a truth." At the bottom of the stairs was a round room filled with doors. They were all mirrors, dozens of doors, and every one reflected something different. June saw herself as she was, and also as she might be in one. She wore a red scarf and carried a briefcase. In another, she was older, sitting on a park bench, sketching the sky. In one, she was crying. In another, she was laughing so hard she held her sides. "They're not predictions," Myra said. "Just possibilities." June turned slowly. "What do I do here?" Myra smiled gently. "Pick one, step through, find out what it shows you." June stood in front of a mirror door, shaped like a droplet of water. Her reflection blinked back, nervous, curious, steady. She reached out. The surface of the door rippled, and then opened. June stepped through the mirror. It didn't feel like glass. It didn't feel like anything. Really, no resistance, no cold, no shimmer. Just a quiet shift. Like walking through fog that didn't bother to be damp. She emerged into a clearing. It wasn't the garden. It wasn't any room in the house. She recognized it was a field, sunlit. Gentle hills rose like sighs in the distance. The grass was gold, waving in a wind she couldn't hear. Above her, the sky had that soft blue that only ever shows up in dreams and watercolor paintings. She turned around, no mirror, no door, just the field, waiting. Then she saw herself, not a reflection, an actual girl, her age, her face, her eyes, but with a red ribbon in her hair and a satchel over her shoulder. She was crouched in the grass, poking something gently with a stick. June blinked at the other. Her looked up, smiled. "About time," she said. June took a step forward. Who are you? The other girl raised an eyebrow. Who do you think? I don't know, June said honestly. Are you me, sort of, said the other her. I'm the version of you that decided to stay curious, that kept asking questions, that didn't stop noticing just because school got loud or life got heavy. June didn't know what to say to that, so the other her stood up and dusted her hands. Come on, you have to see something. They walked side by side through the tall, golden grass. Birds with silver wings dipped in and out of sight, singing notes that felt like the start of songs but never finished them. The wind still didn't make a sound, but June could feel it in her bones. The other her led her to a tree. It was massive, a willow, but taller than any willow had a right to be, with branches like trailing arms and a trunk as wide as a house. Its roots coiled over the earth like snakes asleep in the sun. The other her sat beneath it. This is the tree of my Tavabins, she said. June sat too. It shows you things. The other her nodded. Only when you're still. It doesn't. Like questions that are too sharp. June crossed her legs. Her knees pressed into the soft earth. For a while, nothing happened. Then flickers, like lightning bugs. But brighter, images blinked into existence above them. June saw herself in a dark room, developing photographs. She saw herself helping a younger child tie their shoes. She saw a sketchbook with her name on it, filled with scenes she didn't remember drawing. I don't understand, she whispered. These are things that could be, said the other her. Some of them will be, some won't. June tilted her head. Is this supposed to help? The other girl shrugged. It's not about helping. It's about reminding. The humming house isn't a teacher. It's a keeper. A keeper of what? Of you. They sat in silence for a while. Then June said, what if I make the wrong choices? The other her plucked a blade of grass and twisted it. Then you'll make different ones, and the humming will still be there. June turned her face to the tree, watched more images spark and fade. She saw herself dancing alone in a kitchen, crying in the rain, planting something in a pot on a windowsill, laughing with someone she hadn't met yet. Each image came with a feeling, quick and sharp, like the clink of wind chimes, not heavy, not light dot, just real. Eventually she stood. I think I want to go back now. The other her didn't look. Surprised. You always do. June turned in a slow circle. There was no path, no doorway, no instructions, but she closed her eyes, and she hummed, not the song from the music. Room, not exactly, just a note, steady true. She felt it resonate in her ribs, her toes, her teeth, and when she opened her eyes, she was back. The mirror door closed softly behind her. Myra stood across the room, waiting. You found what you needed, she said. June nodded. I think so. You'll forget some of it, Myra said gently. That's how memory works. But the hum will stay. They walked back upstairs together. At the top of the staircase, Myra paused. There's one more thing you should know, she said. June turned. The house isn't just inside these walls, Myra said. It's anywhere you listen closely. Enough. June didn't answer, but she thought she understood. That night, June didn't tell anyone about her visit, but she sat by her window for a long time, Miso curled in her lap, purring faintly. And when the wind passed her window, she could hear it, low, soft, constant. The hum. June returned to the house on a rainy Tuesday. Not a thunderstorm, just a soft, soaking rain. The kind that made the streets shimmer and the trees drip like sleepy clocks. Her shoes squeaked. Her jacket smelled like damp leaves. But the hum was still there, clear as a bell in her bones. The door in the fence was waiting. Inside the garden had turned foggy. Mist curled around the stepping stones like lazy cats. The flowers had closed their petals, and the vines hung still. The only movement came from the hum, which vibrated slightly stronger today, like it had something to tell her. Myra met her at the door. She didn't say hello. Instead, she handed June a glass marble. It was completely clear, except for a single silver thread that swirled inside like a frozen wisp of smoke. June looked at it. "What's this for?" "It will show you something," Myra said. "But only if you follow it. Follow the marble." "No," Myra said with a small smile. "Follow what it remembers." June held the marble in her hand as they walked. The humming house was quieter than usual, as if holding its breath. Myra led her down a different corridor, one she hadn't seen before, narrower than the rest, with walls the color of candle wax and sconces shaped like moths. At the end of the hall was a doorway. No door, just an opening, and inside, no corners. The room was round, like a dropped pebble had made it. No edges, no seams. Everything curved, the walls, the ceiling, the floor. In the center was a raised platform like a nest, lined with fabric and moss, and what looked like shredded paper. Myra motioned for June to enter. The marble buzzed softly in her hand. She stepped inside. The humming in this room was different. Not a song, not even a tone. It was more like the absence of sound, like the hush after someone stops crying, or the quiet you feel when the lights go out and the refrigerator clicks off and your ears fill with the echo of your own breathing. June sat in the nest. The marble glowed faintly, and then she remembered. It wasn't like a flashback. It wasn't even a vision. It was a knowing. She saw a girl, maybe 6 years old, kneeling on a hardwood floor in a silent room. Her hands were pressed flat. She wasn't crying, but her mouth was pulled tight, like she was holding in a sound. She wasn't June, but she was familiar. The girl was waiting. Someone had left. Or maybe someone hadn't come at all. Either way, the room was heavy with absence. The marble pulsed in June's palm. Myra sat just outside the door. June said nothing. The girl, in the memory, was trying to be still, trying to be good. She was afraid that if she made noise, something worse would happen. That silence was safer. June watched her, and then, in her mind, she stepped forward. She placed the marble in the little girl's hand. The child blinked, looked at it, curled her fingers around it, and the hum returned. Not loud, but there warm, present, and something in June's chest let go. She opened her eyes. The room was unchanged. Myra stood in the doorway, watching her gently. That was the room of holding. She said. June looked down at the marble. It was different now. The silver thread had expanded, filled the whole sphere like a map of veins. "I think it belonged to someone else," June said. Myra nodded. "Most of them do, but sometimes they pass through you to remember themselves." June stood, slow and careful. The hum in her chest was steady now, like a heartbeat. She handed the marble to Myra, who placed it on a shelf that hadn't been there before. The shelf was shaped like an open hand. They walked in silence. As they passed the listening room, the door cracked open a tiny bit, just a sliver. June paused. She placed her fingers gently on the wood. "I don't want to go in yet," she whispered. "That's fine," Myra said. "It'll wait." They walked on, in the round room. Miso stretched on a cushion and blinked at her like she was late to something important. June scratched behind the cat's ears. The fire popped softly. June sat and curled her legs under her. "What does the house want?" she asked. Mira poured them tea. Today's smelled like pine needles and muffins. "It doesn't want," she said. "It remembers, it holds, it hums. But why me?" Mira looked thoughtful. "Because you listen." June thought of the hallway of doors, of the music, the mirrors, the marble, the nest. Each room felt like a note in a song she hadn't finished yet. Not scary, not confusing, just incomplete. "I think the hum is getting louder," she said. Mira smiled. "It does that when someone's almost ready." "For what?" "For the door that doesn't open from the outside." June blinked. "What door is that?" Mira sipped her tea and said nothing. That night, back in her own bed, June left. The window open. Rain tapped gently on the sill. She stared at the ceiling, and in the quiet, space between one breath and the next, she heard it. Not the wind, not the trees, the hum, still there, still waiting. June stood outside the fence the next day, holding nothing in her hands. No marble, no memory, just the weight of something about to happen. The hum met her as soon as she stepped through the green door. Not loud, not even strong, but focused. It felt like being looked at kindly by something too big to fit into words. The garden had changed again. The mist had lifted, and tiny blue mushrooms dotted the base of the trees. The vines had grown bells made of paper, each one fluttering like an earring. One tree had bent slightly, curving its trunk like a bow in greeting Dot. The door to the house stood open. Myra was waiting by the hall. "There's a room I haven't shown you," she said without preamble. June didn't reply. She just nodded. Myra turned and began walking. They went down a hallway that didn't seem to exist until they stepped into it. The wallpaper was stitched cloth, soft under June's fingers, patterned with a single repeating shape. An open eye. It didn't blink. It didn't glow. It simply was. The hallway narrowed, then opened into a room with no lights, only a single window. It was large, stretching from floor to ceiling, and the frame around it was made of smooth, pale stone, carved with dozens of tiny symbols June didn't recognize. There was no furniture, no books, no shelves, no noise, just the window. Mira said, "Step forward when you're ready. It doesn't like to be stared at." June blinked. "How do I look through a window without staring?" Myra gave her a small smile. "You don't look through it. You let it look through you." June stepped forward. The window remained blank. Or maybe not blank, just too deep to be blank. It didn't show the outside world. It didn't reflect her face. It showed depth, layers, movements she couldn't track. She stepped closer, one more step, and it opened. It didn't crack or swing. It simply stopped being wall and started being something else. Suddenly, June was not standing in the room. She was standing in her own bedroom. But not now, not today, not even yesterday. She was 5, clutching a toy rabbit, looking out her reel window as a storm started to rattle the glass. She was crying, softly, rhythmically, like rain on a roof. Her parents' voices were downstairs, arguing gently, not angry, just tired. She remembered this. She'd forgotten she remembered it. The window shimmered. Now she was 7, sitting on the edge of her bed, trying to write a story about a girl with wings. Her pencil kept breaking. Now she was 10, staring at the ceiling, her leg in a cast, wondering if the world remembered her. Now she was now Dot. June turned. She was still in the room. The window hadn't moved. Neither had she, but something had. She felt, peeled open, but not painfully. Like the layers of her had simply made room for more of her. Mira watched from the doorway. The window shows what you've looked at, but never seen, she said. June whispered, "Why show me that?" Mira shrugged. "Because it's yours, and the house doesn't want to keep what belongs to you." June stood very still, then said, "Can I try something?" Myra nodded once. June turned back to the window, and she hemmed softly. Just one note. The window changed. It didn't close. It listened, and then it gave something back. A flash. A glimpse. A future version of her sitting cross-legged on a floor, surrounded by children, reading a book aloud. One of the children had a stuffed cat, tucked under one arm. The scene lasted a second, then faded. June stepped away in the hallway. Again, the hum felt different, like it had leaned in, like it had heard her. Myra didn't say anything. She handed June a key. It was small, brass, and shaped like a question mark. "You'll need this soon," she said, "for the listening room." June asked. Mira only smiled. Back in the round room, Miso walked across the rug with purpose and plopped herself into June's lap without warning. June scratched behind her ears. "I think I'm supposed to go into the listening room soon," Miso Purred. Myra added a log to the fire. The flames caught with a whoosh that didn't echo, as though the room ate sound politely. "Only you will know when," Myra said. June sipped her tea. Today's flavor was harder to place. Something like ink and honey and old paper. She asked, "Did the house hum before you came?" "Oh yes," said Mira, "but differently." "What changed you?" Mira said. "And everyone before you. Every listener gives it a new note." That night, in her own bed, June held the key in her palm. She didn't fall asleep right away. She thought about all the rooms she'd seen, all the ones she hadn't, the mirror dot, the marble dot, the door that didn't open from the outside, and the hum, always. The hum. June didn't go back the next day, or the day after that. She kept the key in her coat pocket, wrapped in a handkerchief like something fragile. At school, her hand would drift toward it during lessons. At home, she'd reach for it before falling asleep. It was always warm, and it always hummed, not loud, not insistent, just there, waiting. By the fourth day, June couldn't ignore it anymore. She stepped through the garden quietly. The vines parted for her now. The path curved slightly, like it had bent to her shape. A row of stones lit up softly as she passed. Glowing pale blue dot. Myra wasn't at the door. Dot June didn't need her to be. She entered the house. The humming filled her chest like breath. The hallway stretched ahead, each door just as she remembered. The music room, the mirror door, the growing drawer, and the listening room. It was open now, just a crack. June reached into her pocket, unwrapped the key, and held it up. It fit the lock with a soft click. The door opened without a sound. The listening room was silent. No windows, no lights. The only thing inside was a chair. Just one, wooden curved, worn smooth. June stepped in. The door closed behind her. Not with menace, just finality, as if to say, this part is only yours. She sat the moment her weight settled into. The chair, the hum stopped, gone, dot total. Silence. It wasn't like the absence of sound in a quiet room. It was deeper, more full. June's ears rang slightly. Her heart beat loud in her chest. Then a whisper, not out loud, not in her ears. Inside, she couldn't hear the words. Not really, they weren't in English. They weren't in anything she'd ever learned. But she knew them, they said. We remember what you forgot. We hold what you dropped. We echo what you need. And then the stories began. They didn't come in order. They weren't like dreams or flashbacks. They were layers. She felt her 6th birthday, the smell of cake and the disappointment of the wrong toy. She heard her mother's voice through a closed door, laughing in a way she hadn't in years. She felt the scrape of her knee when she tripped in front of the whole class. She remembered pretending it didn't hurt. She remembered it did. Each memory came like a raindrop, not painful, not joyful, just real. And every one of them came with a feeling she hadn't known she'd lost. She remembered something else. A friend she'd stopped talking to. No reason. Just drift. The memory smelled like library books and peanut butter. She'd forgotten the way they used to trade stories, writing them on scrap paper and hiding them in each other's desks. She remembered the last one she never answered. The listening room held the tears slipped down her cheeks. Not because of sadness, because of fullness. The kind that comes when someone you didn't know was missing finally comes home. The hum returned softly. It was in her spine, in her palms, in her name, and then the room spoke one last time. You are the echo and the source. You are the question and the key. You are the listener. The door opened. Myra was waiting. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes were glassy. You went in, she said. June nodded. Did it hurt? No, June said, but it changed me. That's what it does. They didn't speak on the way back to the round room. Miso leapt into her lap the moment. She sat down. The tea was already poured. Today's tasted like cinnamon and wood smoke, and endings that felt like beginnings. June looked at the fire. I think I'm ready. Mira didn't ask for what. She just stood, walked to the far wall, and touched it. A panel slid aside. Behind it was a staircase leading upward. June had never seen it before. Not many do, Myra said. June stood. The key glowed faintly in her pocket. The stairs were made of books, not spines, pages, worn and soft beneath her feet. She climbed in silence. Each step felt like turning a page in a story she hadn't realized she was telling. At the top was a door. It was plain, wooden, no knobs, no locks, but June knew what to do. She hemmed. The door opened. The room beyond the door was not what June expected. It wasn't wide or glowing or filled with wonders. It was an attic, wooden rafters, dust swirling in slants of light, and the creak of old boards. Underfoot, the air smelled like dried herbs and paper. There were shelves of objects that didn't quite belong together. A melted candle shaped like a bird, a bowl of watch hands, a wind chime made of teeth, though not human, she hoped. And at the far end of the room, a window, small, round, covered in lace. June walked toward it slowly. It was quiet. Too quiet. Not like the listening room. This wasn't silence. It was watching. On a low table near the window sat a book. It had no title, just a plain leather cover. Scuffed at the edges, she opened it. Inside, a list of names, hundreds of them, written in dozens of scripts, cursive, block letters. symbols that shimmered and then disappeared. Some names had little notes beside them. Stayed 3 nights, built the blue room, left their laughter behind. June flipped through the pages until she found her own name. It wasn't there, but there was a blank space. Waiting, Myra entered the attic, her steps soundless on the old wood. "The book doesn't write itself until you choose," she said. June didn't ask what that meant. She was beginning to understand that the house only answered when the question was ready. She closed the book gently. "What is this place?" she asked. Mira sat on a stool by the window. "This is where the house listens to itself." June raised an eyebrow. "The rest of it hums for you. This room hums for itself." June sat across from her. "Why am I here?" Myra looked at her carefully. "Because the house is almost ready to sing." They sat in silence for a while. Dust motes spun lazily through the light. Then Myra said, "You can stay if you want." June blinked. "Stay, not forever, not unless you choose, but long enough to leave something behind." June thought of the book, of the growing drawer, the music room, the mirror, the girl in the field, the marble, the window, the hum. What would I leave? Mira smiled. "Whatever matters most." That night, June dreamed of the house. But this time, she wasn't walking through it. She was it. She could feel the doors like eyelids, the hallways like arms, the rooms like thoughts. She hadn't finished thinking, and somewhere, far below, a tiny heartbeat that wasn't hers, but was still part of her. She woke up before sunrise and knew what she had to do. In the round room, Mira was already waiting. "I want to leave something behind," June said. Mira nodded, unsurprised. "Then follow me." They went to the growing drawer. June held out her closed hand. Inside it, the flower from the button, still warm, still whole. She placed it on the velvet pillow. The drawer glowed this time. Instead of vines or blossoms, it grew a book, small, bound in green, blank inside. Myra handed it to her. June understood in the attic. June sat by the round window and began to write. She wrote the names of the rooms. She wrote what she remembered, and what she was sure she'd forget. She wrote the feeling of humming in her chest, the way the marble had pulsed, the sound of the silence, the way Myra said nothing at all and still said everything. And when she finished, she didn't sign it. She simply closed the book and set it on the table next to the ledger, next to her blank name, and the hum sang one clear note. The humming was everywhere. Now loud, not urgent, just constant, like a song that had always been playing but was finally close enough to hear all the lyrics. June sat in the attic again, the little green book closed beside her. She traced the pattern in the wood grain under her fingers, watching the dust swirl like tiny ghosts. Mira was not there, nor Miso. She was alone, but not lonely. She stood and walked to the round window. The lace curtain had been pushed aside by the breeze, except there was no breeze. The house was breathing, and it was time. The stairwell appeared. When she turned, it hadn't been there before. Not in the attic. Not in the house. It spiraled downward, narrow and deep, like the stem of a flower bending underground. Each step she took sounded like a heartbeat, not hers. The house's down, 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 past walls of shifting shadows. The pictures here didn't stay still. They moved when she blinked. One showed her running through a field, another standing on a dock watching a lantern float away. Another, she wasn't in it at all. but she knew the place. It was a version of her childhood bedroom, only cleaner, quieter, as if it had been remembered by someone else. When she reached the bottom, the humming stopped. The room was dark, not black, not void, just dusk-like. Waiting in the center stood a door. No frame, no knob, no markings. Just a tall, narrow rectangle of wood that shimmered at the edges, like heat rising from pavement. June stepped closer. The air buzzed faintly. The hum, barely audible, returned, but now it came from inside the door. From beyond it, this was the door, the one Myra had spoken of. The door that doesn't open from the outside. She took a breath and placed her palm on it. Nothing happened. She leaned in and whispered, "I'm ready." The door didn't move. She closed her eyes, listened and hummed. Not just a note, a phrase, a memory, a feeling. The hum was her now, full of every visit, every room, every tear and smile and question she hadn't asked. The door shivered. It opened. What lay beyond wasn't a place, it was a moment. It felt like waking up from a dream and realizing the dream had been real. It felt like remembering something important, just as it was about to slip away. It felt like being held. The space was bright, not with light, but with clarity in the middle of. It stood, herself. Older, not by much, but enough to show in the eyes. She wore a long coat, a satchel, boots with dirt on the toes. She looked like someone who had traveled, someone who knew things, someone who had kept listening. The older June smiled gently. "I thought you might come." June swallowed. "What is this?" "It's the part where you choose. Choose what? To stay, or to carry it with you." June blinked. "Aren't those the same?" The older her nodded slightly. "They become the same, but not right away." Silence stretched between them. Then the older her reached into her satchel and pulled out something small, a cat-shaped pin, Miso's likeness. She handed it to June. A reminder. June held it in her hand and felt the hum settle into her chest. Not buzzing anymore, just there, like her heartbeat, like her name, like her breath. "You can leave," the older her said. "The house will stay." June looked around the space again. It didn't shimmer now. It was steady, solid, kind. "But I'll never be the same," she said quietly. "No one is, after listening." The older her stepped back and vanished. June stood alone again. Only she wasn't alone. Not really. She turned. The door stood. Open still, waiting to take her back. Not to the attic, not to Myra, not even to the round room, to the world, to her life, to whatever came next. She stepped through. The return was not a jolt, not a flash, not even a blink. 1 second she stood, inside the door, the next. She was in her own room, window open, breeze brushing her cheek. Morning.miso was curled in her lap. June didn't remember her jumping up. On the nightstand sat the green book, closed, but different. It now had a title, The House That Hummed underneath. It, a name, her name, written in her own handwriting. Downstairs, the kettle whistled. Rain tapped at the window. The world looked unchanged. But she had carried something back, and somewhere, just beneath the sounds of the street and the rustling leaves, the hum continued. Quiet, steady, true. June didn't tell anyone about the house, not in words, anyway, but the echo of it began to show in other ways. At school, she started noticing when people paused before speaking, the little silence before they said what they really meant. At home, she caught herself humming, just softly, when the house creaked at night, or when the toaster stuck, or when the cat wouldn't settle. She hummed when things felt strange, or lonely, or too quiet, and it always helped. One morning, she found a paper folded in the pocket of her coat. She didn't remember putting it there inside. It read, "When you listen, the world listens back." She smiled, folded it again, and tucked it into the green book on her shelf. The book hadn't changed, but she had. Sometimes she felt the house still, not as a place, but as a presence, when she sat under certain trees, or when the breeze made the curtains sway just right, or when a cat she'd never met brushed against her ankle and purred, like it knew her. The hum was there, faint, familiar, forever. One evening, her younger cousin visited. He was 7, all elbows and questions and sticky fingers. "Do you believe in magic?" he asked her suddenly, over a plate of spaghetti. June tilted her head. "What kind of magic?" He shrugged. "The kind that follows you around, even when you're not looking." June smiled. "Yeah," she said. "I do." That night, she opened the green book again. The pages were still filled with her handwriting, memories, feelings, questions. But now, a few new pages had appeared, not written by her. They were drawings, soft pencil sketches. One showed the mirror door, one showed the listening room's chair, one showed Myra holding miso like a loaf of bread, and one page showed her standing in front of the humming house's front gate, looking back over her shoulder. She hadn't drawn them, but she didn't feel surprised. That weekend, she started a new notebook, blank pages. She titled it, "Rooms I Haven't Found Yet." And on the first page, she drew a door, not one she'd seen before, one shaped like a star. Spring came, so did rainstorms and wildflowers, and late walks under the swelling moon. The house remained quiet, or maybe just farther away, but sometimes, in dreams, she'd hear a faint creak of a wooden floor, or the sigh of a drawer opening, or Mira's voice saying nothing at all. And once, she dreamed she was back in the music room. This time, she wasn't alone. Children sat cross-legged around the piano, listening, waiting. She opened her mouth, and June had begun to notice things, small things, mostly quiet things. A pencil rolling off a desk and stopping at the exact edge, as though caught by invisible fingers. A door closing behind her with no draft in the room. A melody someone hummed on the street that matched the song she'd dreamt about the night before. It was subtle, like the world was nudging her, reminding her the house might be far away now, but parts of it had clearly followed her back. Or maybe, she thought, the house had always been in the world, tucked between moments, hiding in the folds of time. It didn't matter, she was listening. Now she began carrying the green book with her. Not always, not to school or crowded places, but on walks, in quiet corners of the library, in parks where the benches faced trees instead of traffic. Sometimes she'd open it and feel warmth rise from the pages, as though the hum itself had curled up in the spine. She noticed the book never felt heavy. No matter how much she added to it, it remained the same weight in her bag. One afternoon, while waiting for the bus in a rain-damp shelter, she opened the book and found a page she hadn't written. The handwriting wasn't hers. It simply read, "You will find another room. This one won't wait." She read it twice. The bus pulled up, and instead of boarding, June turned and walked in the opposite direction. She followed no map, only a feeling like someone tugging, a thread through her ribs, not painful but insistent. A gentle pull, like a question that needed asking. She walked past neighborhoods she didn't know, fences painted in colors too bold for their surroundings, a garden full of glass bottles, a bakery where the scent of cardamom seemed to anchor her feet. Eventually, she came to a tiny alley, no wider than her arms spread out, and there it was, a door. Ordinary at first glance, weathered wood, brass handle, a dent near the bottom. But the second she saw it, the hum pressed against her chest like a heartbeat. She knew this was a room. Not in the house, but of it she knocked. The sound echoed strangely, not loud, but deep. The door opened on its own. Inside was a shop, or something like one. The walls were lined with shelves, but instead of products, there were objects. A snow globe with a storm frozen mid-swirling. A jar filled with nothing but laughter labeled July 9th, 1996. A single ballet slipper floating in a tank of clear liquid. Behind the counter stood a woman with silver in her hair and ink-stained fingers. She wore a cardigan that looked like it had been knitted from the night sky. She didn't smile, but she nodded once. June. June didn't ask how she knew her name. "Where am I?" she asked instead. The woman gestured to the shelves, where the echoes settled. The woman's name was Anya. She didn't explain much, not about the shop, not about herself, but she offered June a stool and a cup of something that tasted like dried apples and old letters. "You're not the first to carry the hum," Anya said, stirring her drink. "But you might be the youngest." June's fingers curled around the cup. "You knew Mira." Anya nodded once. "We've all known Mira." "Is she?" Anya cut her off gently. "Mira is wherever someone listens long enough to find her." June let that settle. It made sense in the way dreams do, or poems, or old photos with no names on the back. She stayed in the shop for what felt like hours. Maybe it was, maybe more. She explored the shelves carefully, drawn towards certain objects without understanding why. One box, sealed shut, hummed softly when she passed. Another shelf held a collection of tiny clocks, each ticking at its own rhythm. When she leaned close, she heard whispers beneath the ticking. Nothing she could decipher, just the sound of memory being remembered. Anya said little, but watched her with soft eyes. Before June left, she handed her a small envelope. Inside was a folded paper bird. "I don't understand," June said. "You don't have to, not yet." June placed it in the green book. The walk home was quiet, but the hum was louder now, not in her ears. In the spaces between things, in the way the clouds shifted suddenly into the shape of a window, in the way a wind chime she passed played, the opening notes to the melody from the listening room, in the way a child on a tricycle stopped and looked at her, smiled and said, "You're glowing." She didn't feel frightened. She felt ready. That night she dreamed again. This time, the house didn't appear, but she stood in a hallway of doors, each slightly ajar. Behind one, she heard laughter. Behind another, waves crashing. Another held silence so deep she felt it in her teeth. She opened none of them. She simply walked the hallway, listening, and when she awoke, the green book lay open beside her. Someone had added another drawing. It showed a shop in an alley, and a paper bird flying out the window. It was raining again, not heavily, but with that soft, even rhythm that made the air feel thick with secrets. June sat by her window, green book open, watching drops snake their way down the glass, like they were tracing messages she couldn't quite decode. She'd been waiting. For what? She wasn't sure. A sign, a sound, a shift. She turned the page in the green book. Another drawing had appeared. This one showed a house, not the one she'd visited, but close, similar angles, a roof that sloped like a shoulder. But the windows were different. One was glowing, and on the door, no knob, no handle, just smooth wood worn down from touch. Below the drawing were 4 words. Not all doors open in June. Closed the book gently and stood. Miso meowed softly from the corner, but didn't follow. She walked without her coat this time, letting the rain settle into her sleeves, her collar, her hair. The streets were quiet. A paper cup floated slowly down the gutter. Someone's wind chime tapped out an uncertain tune. She didn't know where she was going, but her feet did. At the end of a long block lined with birch trees, she saw it. A house she'd passed before dozens of times. Boarded windows, no mailbox, a patchy lawn. It had always looked empty. But now, just like in the drawing, one of the windows was glowing. Not with electric light, with memory. June stepped closer. The hum was low and deep, almost like a drumbeat felt through the soles of her shoes. She walked to the porch, and there it was, a door. No handle. Just wood. Smoothed and worn by time, she reached out. Nothing moved. She closed her eyes, and instead of knocking, she placed her forehead gently against the door and listened. She heard something soft, her voice, not present day, but younger, crying, not with panic, with loss. And suddenly, she remembered the day her favorite book was accidentally thrown away during a spring cleaning. She hadn't cried then. She'd said it was okay, that it didn't matter, but it had. She remembered the pages, the smell, the folded corners, the scribbles she'd made in the margins. She had pretended to forget. The door pulsed. She took a breath and hummed. The wood under her fingertips grew warm. A seam appeared, not splitting open, but letting go. And then she was inside. It was a hallway, simple, familiar this time. The doors on either side weren't magical or strange. They were hers, her childhood, bedroom, the bathroom with the chipped tile, the kitchen with the dented fridge. The hum was in the house now, in her memories, in her home. This was where she'd carried it all along, and suddenly it made sense. All of it, the rooms, the voices, the growing drawer, the mirror, the field, the girl with her face and a red ribbon. They hadn't been tests. They hadn't been puzzles. They'd been reminders, pieces of herself, waiting to be heard again. She walked through the house slowly, touching the walls, letting her fingers trail across the wallpaper, the corners of picture frames, the backs of chairs. Each object hummed in its own way, a language of memory, not words, not symbols, just presence. In the living room, she found a letter on the table. It was addressed to her in looping handwriting. She didn't recognize, but instantly trusted. She opened it. Inside was a single sentence: "You are the room." The hum bloomed so fully in her chest, it almost lifted her from the floor. She closed her eyes and felt every part of her life hum back at her. Not just the moments she had kept, but the ones she thought were lost. They were all still there, held by the house. Held by her. She opened her eyes and stepped outside. The rain had stopped. Everything was soft, still real, and in the silence between footsteps, she could hear it, the steady, familiar music of the world remembering itself. Weeks passed, not quickly, not slowly, just ... properly, like a song playing at the speed it was meant to be heard. June didn't go looking for new doors anymore. She didn't need to. The hum had changed, not vanished, not grown faint, but shifted. It no longer called her somewhere else. It anchored her. She carried it now, not like a secret, like a second heartbeat. She noticed it in ordinary places. The hush before a friend confessed something important. The pause before a teacher chose to be kind instead of correct. The silence in the library between turning one page and starting the next. She hummed when she was unsure. She hummed when she missed someone. She hummed when she felt whole. On her 12th birthday, she received no strange letters, no mysterious drawings, no magic shops or vanishing cats. Instead, she received a note from her cousin, the one who had asked about magic. He had written a story about a hallway full of keys and a girl who listened to walls. It made her smile in a way that tugged at her ribs. The green book was still on her shelf. It hadn't changed, but the blank pages in the back had begun to fill themselves. Not with drawings, with doors, dozens of them, each one different, each one unnamed, each one waiting. That night, just before sleep claimed her. She felt it, not a knock, not a tug, a warmth behind her ribs, like someone had lit a candle inside her. She sat up, blinking into the darkness of her room. There, in the corner, stood a door, not glowing, not humming, just there, unopened, and yet not unfamiliar. She didn't move. She didn't need to. She knew what it was. A room she had made for herself, one that would open only when she truly needed it, not when she was lost, not when she was curious, but when she was ready again to listen, to remember, to return. The hum whispered one last time that night, as soft as a lullaby. You are not finished. You are only between. The house is wherever you hum. June slept peacefully, and the world turned, and somewhere, quiet and far and close and deep, the house hummed on. The door in her room stayed for 3 nights. It didn't glow or hum or pulse. It simply existed, like a quiet thought at the edge of sleep. June didn't open it. She wasn't afraid, just patient. She had learned that the house and all the echoes of it moved at their own rhythm. On the 4th morning, the door was gone. In its place sat a shoebox wrapped in blue twine. Inside, a pair of soft gloves stitched with constellations. A matchbox with a tiny folded note inside that said, "Use only in darkness," and a stone no bigger than a walnut that hummed when she held it near her ear. No instructions, just those 3 things. That day, she skipped the bus and walked a longer path. Home, through the park, across the bridge, down the alley with the red bricks. She passed a bakery she didn't recognize and stopped when she heard music. Not playing over speakers, not coming from an instrument. Hummed. Quiet, deliberate and familiar. It was the same melody she'd first heard in the house's music room. She followed it. Behind the bakery was a narrow set of stairs leading to a painted door with a sign, "Closed Mondays." "Unless you hum." June smiled and hummed a single note. The door creaked open. The room inside was warm. A string of yellow bulbs curved overhead like lazy lightning bugs. Along one wall, a shelf of books, all blank. Along another, a set of chairs, arranged in a circle, as though expecting guests who hadn't arrived yet. And in the center, a table. On it sat a teapot, steaming gently, though no one was there. A note for the listener. Take what you need, leave what you don't. June poured herself a cup. It tasted like strawberries and dreams she hadn't had yet. She left the humming stone on the table, and the teapot poured itself a second cup in return. She stayed a while, sketching in her green book, recording the room in detail. When she looked up, a boy about her age had entered the space. Quiet and wide, dash-eyed. He held a book like hers. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. He simply nodded once, and she nodded back. And something clicked into place. She was not the only one carrying rooms with her. Not the only one who listened. Not the only one who'd found the hum when she left. The door closed behind her gently. No click. No lock, but when she looked back, it was no longer there. Only the scent of tea and old wood remained. That evening, back in her room, she noticed something new. The gloves, the ones from the shoebox, now bore a stitched letter in each palm, L, and a dot inside the wrist hem, a tiny phrase, touch and remember. She pulled them on, and the hum came through stronger than ever. It didn't feel like memory. It felt like invitation. She pressed her gloved palm to the wall above her desk, and, for a second, no more. The wall rippled, a shimmer, a breath, then stilled. She wasn't ready yet, but she would be.